All right, let's dive into something pretty interesting today. Something seems like it's been getting a lot of attention lately, the 4-day work week.
Yeah, definitely seems like it's getting more and more popular.
Yeah, and it's not hard to see why, right? I mean, who wouldn't want an extra day off every week? We've got a ton of research here, studies, articles, even government reports, and it really looks like we might be on the cusp of a huge shift in how we think about work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are even some experts out there predicting that by 2030, the 4-day week could be like the standard.
Wow. That's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah.
So, I guess the big question is this just hype? Or is there something real here? I mean, is this actually going to happen? Or is this just a pipe dream?
Well, I think there's definitely some substance to it. We've got actual real-world examples to look at, companies that have tried it, even entire countries that are making the switch.
Right.
So it's not just theoretical anymore.
Okay, so let's start with maybe one of the most compelling pieces of evidence we have, which is that huge study out of the UK. This was, if I'm remembering correctly, the world's largest trial of the 4-day work week. I mean, they had like 61 companies participating.
Yeah, it was a pretty big one.
And the results were, I mean, pretty amazing, right? Like 89% of those companies decided to just stick with the 4-day week even after the trial was over.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, right?
It is. So, like, what do you think? What was it about the 4-day week that made these companies want to just completely change how they operate?
Well, one of the biggest surprises, I think, was that productivity didn't actually go down, like a lot of people thought it would.
Right.
Like, you're working less, so obviously you're going to get less done. But in a lot of cases, it either stayed the same or it even went up.
That's really interesting. So it's not like you're just like compressing 5 days of work into 4 and burning everyone out.
Right. Exactly. And I think a lot of it has to do with, like, if people are well rested, if they have more time to, like, recharge and take care of things outside of work, then they're just going to be more focused and efficient when they are working.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like that whole idea of working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. Yeah. And the study also found that there were, improvements in all these other areas too, like employee well-being, job satisfaction. People were reporting lower levels of burnout.
So it sounds like it's not just about, giving people an extra day off. It's like this ripple effect that actually impacts the whole company culture.
Totally. I think that's a really important point. It creates this more positive and productive work environment overall.
That's fascinating. And it's not just the UK either, right? I mean, Belgium actually went ahead and made the 4-day work week the law.
They did, yeah. Back in November 2023, Belgium became the first country in the world to actually, make it a law. So that was a pretty big deal. And the interesting thing about the Belgian model is that it's pretty flexible. So, employees can choose to work 4 or 5 days. It's not like a mandate or anything.
Oh, so it's more about giving people options and finding a balance that works for both the employee and the employer.
Yeah, exactly. It's about, giving people more control over their time and their lives.
I mean, that's got to have some pretty big economic implications, though, right? I mean, if a whole country starts working less, does that make them less competitive?
That's a really good question, and it's one that economists are kind of grappling with right now. There are definitely arguments to be made on both sides.
Yeah, like I could see how it could hurt the economy if everyone's suddenly working less.
Yeah.
But then I guess there's also the argument that if people have more free time, they're going to be spending more money, which could actually boost the economy.
Right. Exactly. Like more people are going to be going out to restaurants, traveling, doing all sorts of things that they wouldn't have time for if they were working 5 days a week.
So it could actually create new jobs and new industries, right?
Yeah, potentially. It's definitely a complex issue, and there's no easy answer.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Germany.
Mm-hmm.
They already have one of the shortest work weeks in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. But they're also experimenting with the 4-day work week.
They are. Yeah, they've got this pilot project going on with, I think it's 45 companies, and what they're doing is a little bit different.
Okay, how so?
So instead of just cutting a day off the work week, they're really focusing on changing how work gets done.
Mm-hmm.
So they're encouraging less meetings, more independent work, that kind of thing.
So it's not just about working fewer hours, it's about working differently.
Right, exactly.
That's really interesting. I wonder if that's something that we're seeing in other countries as well, like this focus on restructuring work rather than just shortening the hours.
I think so. A lot of the companies that have successfully made the switch to a 4-day work week, they've really had to rethink how they operate.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential benefits of the 4-day work week, but let's be real for a second. There's got to be some downsides too, right? I mean, it can't all be sunshine and roses.
Oh, for sure. It's not a perfect solution, and there are definitely some challenges that come with it.
Like what?
Well, one of the things that comes up a lot is that for some people, it can actually lead to more stress.
Really? How so?
Well, if you're still expected to do the same amount of work, but you have less time to do it, that can put a lot of pressure on people.
Yeah, that makes
Mm.
sense. So it's not just about cutting hours, it's about making sure that the workload is manageable too.
Exactly. And it's about having clear boundaries between work and personal life, which can be tough when you're trying to squeeze a lot into a shorter amount of time.
Right. And I think we actually have some research that backs this up.
Right.
There was that study from Auckland University in New Zealand that found that some people in a 4-day work week trial were actually more stressed out.
Yep, that's the one. And what they found was that it wasn't just about the reduced hours, it was also about how work was structured and how expectations were managed.
So it sounds like it's not as simple as just saying, okay, everyone gets an extra day off.
Yeah.
There needs to be a lot of thought and planning that goes into it.
Totally. It requires a real culture shift, a move away from that old school mentality of presenteeism, just being at your desk for as many hours as possible.
Right.
It's about focusing on outcomes and productivity and trusting employees to manage their own time effectively.
So it's a lot more than just, a scheduling change. It's a whole new way of thinking about work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. It's like a whole paradigm shift almost. But okay, let's zoom out for a second. Think about like the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
What if, like this actually takes off?
Hmm.
What if the 4-day work week becomes like the norm? What would that mean for society?
Man, that's a big question.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting one to think about. Like, imagine a world where everyone just has, like, way more free time.
Right.
What would people do with all that extra time? I mean, you could see it having a huge impact on all sorts of things. Like, think about the travel industry.
Oh, yeah.
People could take longer vacations, explore new places, leisure, entertainment. All those industries would probably see a huge boom.
Yeah, I could see that. People would have more time to like pursue their hobbies, spend time with family and friends.
Exactly. And it's not just about, like, fun stuff either. People could also use that extra time for personal development, taking classes, learning new skills.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like a whole renaissance almost, right?
Yeah.
Like people would have the time and energy to really focus on things that are important to them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But, it's not all going to be perfect. There are definitely some potential downsides to consider too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like what
Yeah.
what are some of the things that could go wrong?
Well, one thing that worries me is that it could actually make inequality worse.
How so?
Well, think about it. Like, if you're in a high-paying job, you're probably more likely to be able to negotiate a 4-day work week.
Right.
But if you're in a low-paying job, you might not have that same kind of flexibility.
So the people who are already doing well would benefit even more, while the people who are struggling would get left behind.
Exactly. And that could really widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's like, we got to make sure that everyone benefits from this, not just a select few.
Absolutely. And there are other challenges too, like what about childcare?
Oh, yeah.
If traditional work schedules are changing, we need to make sure that there are affordable, accessible options for parents. And elder care, too.
Right.
There are a lot of things that we need to figure out as a society if we're going to make this transition successfully.
So it's not just about individual companies changing their policies. It's about a whole systemic shift.
Exactly. And, speaking of systemic shifts, we can't talk about the 4-day work week without talking about technology.
Right, because technology is a huge part of this whole conversation.
Right.
I mean, it's already changing the way we work in so many ways.
Totally. Like, automation is taking over more and more tasks, which is freeing up human workers to do other things.
And some people argue that that's exactly why we need a shorter work week. Like, if machines are doing more of the work, then humans should be working less.
Yeah, I think that's a valid argument,
Okay.
but it's not that simple either, right?
Right.
Because technology is also creating new jobs, new industries.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Exactly. It's really fascinating to think about how all of these things are interconnected.
Yeah. Like, on the one hand, we have this incredible opportunity to reshape the way we work and live.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we need to be really careful about how we do it.
Totally. And I think the key is to focus on using technology in a way that benefits everyone.
Right.
Not just automating jobs away, but actually using it to create a more equitable and sustainable future of work.
Okay, so if we can manage to do that, if we can figure out how to leverage technology in the right way, what does that future look like? What's the best case scenario here?
Well, I think in the best case scenario, work becomes something that's more integrated into our lives. It's not this separate thing that we dread.
Right.
It's something that we can actually enjoy and find meaning in. And we have more time and energy for things outside of work, like our families, our communities, our passions.
It's not just about working less, it's about living more.
Yeah, exactly. It's about redefining what it means to have a good life.
And that brings us back to our listener. Like, if you had the option of a 4-day work week, what would you do with all that extra time? What are the things that you've always wanted to do but never had the time for?
Yeah, think about it. What brings you joy? What makes you feel alive? Maybe it's spending more time with loved ones. Maybe it's traveling the world. Maybe it's starting that business you've always dreamed of.
Maybe it's just having time to relax and recharge.
Yeah, that's important too. But the point is, you have options.
Yeah.
And in a world where work takes up less of our time, we have the opportunity to really create the lives that we want.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing to think about all the possibilities, right? Like, if we could actually pull this off, it would be huge. But I want to go back to something you said earlier about how this could be like a catalyst for bigger changes in society. Do you really think that's possible, or is that just like wishful thinking?
I think it's definitely possible. This whole conversation about the 4-day work week, it's forcing us to really examine some fundamental assumptions about like how we structure our lives, how we think about work.
Mm.
It's not just about working less. It's about like rethinking our values, prioritizing well-being,
Right.
creating a more sustainable and equitable future.
So it's a starting point, maybe, like a
Exactly.
way to get people thinking about these bigger issues.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really powerful.
Okay, so let's say, like, we all agree that this is a good idea, that we want to move towards a 4-day work week. What are some of the things that we need to do to actually make it happen? Like, what are the biggest challenges?
Well, I think one of the biggest hurdles is going to be convincing businesses that it's actually good for them. There's still a lot of skepticism out there, a lot of fear that it's going to hurt productivity, increase costs.
Right.
So we need to really demonstrate that it's a win-win.
So more research, more data, more case studies showing that companies can be successful with a 4-day work week.
Exactly. And we also need to make sure that everyone benefits. We talked earlier about the potential for this to increase inequality.
Right.
So we need to be really intentional about making sure that the benefits are shared by everyone, not just those in high-paying white-collar jobs.
Yeah, that's crucial.
It's about addressing things like wage stagnation, access to affordable childcare. There are a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
So it's a big challenge, but it sounds like it could be worth it. Like, if we can pull this off, it could really change the world.
I think so. It's about more than just work. It's about creating a society that values people's time, their well-being, their happiness.
Yeah, it's about giving people more control over their lives. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Imagine a world where you have an extra day every week to do the things that you love, to spend time with the people that you care about, to just be yourself. What would that look like for you? What would you do with that gift of time? It's something to think about as we move forward into this exciting and maybe a little bit uncertain future of work. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.